All right, thanks, Nicole. So good morning, everybody. I'm Jessie Kirshner. I'm the OSU Extension Representative Non-Voting Member on the OWEB board. Just want to welcome you all to the Tracking and Communicating Committee meeting today. And I'm joined by my co-chair, Claire, who I'll let introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Claire Takella. I am the Assistant State Con for Partnerships with Oregon's Natural Resources Conservation Service and a non-voting member of the board.
Thanks, Claire. So just a quick reminder to folks that this is being live streamed. This meeting is being live streamed on OWEB's YouTube channel, and it's also being recorded. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, the meeting materials are in the board and committee section of the OWEB website. Committee materials are towards the bottom of the page, and viewers can click on the relevant committee and have access to the current meeting materials as well as past meeting recordings. So we'll shift over to introductions of our other committee members and then OWEB staff members. So Mark, you want to go first?
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Mark Lebhart, and I have the privilege of being the ODF&W Commission representative on OWEB.
All right, Brian. Thanks, Mark.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Brian Staub, and I'm a federal board member, ex officio, non-voting member, representing the U.S. Forest Service out of the Pacific Northwest Regional Office. Thanks. Good to be here.
Thanks, Brian. All right, we'll shift over to OWEB. Courtney.
Good morning, Courtney Schaff, OWEB's Monitoring and Reporting Program Manager.
Good morning, Stephanie.
Good morning. I'm Stephanie Page, Deputy Director at OWEB.
And Audrey.
Yeah, good morning. Audrey Hatch, the Conservation Outcomes Coordinator on OWEB staff.
And Nicole.
Hello, everyone. Nicole Bettinardi. I am the OWEB Board Liaison and Executive Assistant.
All right, thanks everybody. So just a quick review of our meeting agenda. I don't believe we have any public comment for today. Okay, so no public comment today. The primary agenda item is that we're going to be doing a presentation where we're hearing from OWEB on OWEB Reporting and Communications 101. And then we will have some wrap up and time to talk about potential future topics. And I think with that, this feels so formal, which is like goes against, it feels like OWEB. But we'll go ahead and turn it over to OWEB staff to start the presentation.
All right, I'm going to pull up the presentation and make a few introductory remarks. Courtney's got a few introductory things to say, and then we'll walk through some details about OWEB's reporting and communications activities. So give me just a second to pull everything up and get squared away here and make sure. Yep. All right. So, good morning, committee members. Stephanie Page again with OWEB for the record. We generate a lot of different reports and data at the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, and our partners generate quite a bit of data that we store. And we've got a lot of great information using those data as well as stories to communicate. So we're going to walk you through these functions at OWEB today, the reporting and the communicating. Audrey and Courtney are going to walk through reporting, and then Linda and I will take the baton and walk through communications. So the first bullet on this list is introductions, and just wanted to mention a couple of folks who are not here today, as well as the team members who you see here. So who are the communications and reporting folks at OWEB? We've got two team members that are focused on OWEB's reporting systems, Bobby Riggers and Paula Wills. Audrey is a key part of the monitoring and reporting team, and one of her roles is to work with internal and external partners to create a variety of reports. And then we have Linda Replinger, who you all know, OWEB's publications coordinator. So you're going to hear later on in the presentation about the incredible diversity of communications work that Linda does. Courtney, anything else you wanted to add here about what we're going to cover today?
Yeah, I guess I will just add, as Audrey and I give the presentation today and talk a little bit about the aspects that Paula and Bobby touch on, we'll be touching a little bit on the roles they have. And the other reporting staff that aren't on today are related to our Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery reporting, and we will be touching on that when we get there. Okay. So as Audrey and I, and as well as the other reporting staff have been thinking about, what's the story we want to tell you all today as board members? What's the messages we want to convey as we talk, and what do we want to leave you with? Is Audrey really honed in on this first one, is what an asset data is to OWEB. We house lots of information on our grants through our different databases and through the Oregon Water Restoration Inventory. We host a lot of information on completed projects, but we really work with our agency partners, ODF&W and Department of Environmental Quality, to really house the other data that we rely on to tell stories and report out the impacts of OWEB's restoration projects. So just really across the state, enterprise data is such an asset, and it's so important. And we're going to tell a little bit of that story today. And then how we can use it in the future to both think about monitoring we might want to do, as well as communication. And then the various tools that we're going to kind of demonstrate to you today and show you, Audrey and I will, is we have a lot of ability to internally look at data, and which helps us tell stories, as well as a lot of this information is available externally. And we'll demonstrate a little bit about how external partners can access the variety of information tools we have so they can tell their own stories. Steph?
Yep. Another thing we really want to leave with you today is that reporting and communications are very interconnected. We gather data about watershed projects from grantees. We summarize them in reports in a bunch of different ways, by county, by fund source, by project area, and so on. We package that information with photos and success stories, and we create presentations, social media posts, fact sheets, videos, and other tools that you'll hear about later on today. So you can almost imagine the life cycle of a piece of data or information that grantees submit to us as part of a grant funded project. It goes into our databases, and then it's reported as part of an online interactive map, or it's reported to federal agencies as part of our federally funded work, or reported in a presentation or a video or some other success story. And then we can use that information over and over again and package it in different ways to tell stories or to summarize facts about the projects that we fund in the aggregate. So we do a great job of leveraging the data that we collect through these different systems. And then the other thing we really want to leave with you is that we have a communication strategy at OWEB. It links strongly to the strategic plan, and you'll also see how the data that we gather is connected with communications and connected with that communication strategy. All right, so I'm going to pass the baton to Audrey and Courtney for the data and reporting overview.
Yep. Go ahead, Audrey.
Yeah, thanks. So because, as you all know, OWEB is a state agency, all of the Oregon state agencies are working with guidance from the Central Oregon Department of Administrative Services, and specifically Enterprise Information Services, to really improve the management of those data sets that we're responsible for. So all state agencies are increasing our efforts to make sure data in Oregon is more discoverable, meaning more people can find it, it's more available, and it's useful for work planning and decision making. And these centrally led efforts also help make OWEB's data sets available to our customers throughout the state in some new ways. And one example of that is all Oregon state agency geospatial data is available through a statewide geospatial data clearinghouse. So that's one way that the restoration data that OWEB is responsible for can be used along with data sets that are managed by other agencies, such as water quality or fish habitat. So our presentation today will include several examples of data discovery using OWEB's resources to answer some of the common questions we hear, such as where should we invest those limited restoration funds? How much has been invested in a particular area of the state? And then along with information from other state agencies and partners, we can begin to answer some broader questions like, are we seeing improvements in fish and wildlife species? Are we seeing improvements in water quality? So that's a quick overview of data as an asset, and I'll hand it back to Courtney.
Thanks. So this is probably something you might hear us mention a lot when we give presentations in front of the board. It's OWEB's grant management system, and this is a tool that both OWEB staff use to access information about OWEB's grants, both the applications, and I'll show a little bit more on the next slide, as well as our grantees can access information. And one of the things Audrey and I are going to talk about today is there's two types of data availability at OWEB. There is real time, which is OWEB's grant management system is real time, up-to-date information. And then there's going to be data that's available, but it's updated on a regular cycle and it's not real-time data. So through OWEB's grant management system, both OWEB staff and grantees can find information on grant awards. Actually, go ahead and go to the next slide, Steph.
Oops, sorry. Okay, there we go.
So our grantees can go into OWEB's online grant management system, and they can search for information on their grants, as well as any other grant that OWEB that has been applied to OWEB, whether it is funded, it is not awarded, it is canceled, it is terminated, it is in monitoring status, or it is complete. They're able to access their own grant applications. They can access another grantee's application. So, and I can see this isn't super easy to read, but they can, if they're interested in looking at other types of like juniper removal projects that have been funded, they can go in and search for that, and they can access another grantee's application, which can help them when they're developing their own applications. They can look for information that was funded, a certain type of project that was funded in one of OWEB's regions. And so here you've got like a little bit of a data display on restoration grants that were funded in our Region 5, which is Kobe Menton's Eastern region, and projects that were funded last biennium, from July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2023. You can see a summary of the amount that was awarded, what's been paid out to date, what's the balance, how many projects were awarded, and then here's an example of one grant application. Grantees also do project completion reporting through here. So you can even dive a little bit deeper and you can see pictures that have been submitted as part of a project completion report. You can dive deeper and see information on lessons learned. You can see information on match funding. Some of it is a lot easier to query and access than others, but it is all there, and it can be exported into Excel sheets that can be sorted, and the information can be looked at in different views. We often get grad students or researchers from other states that want to access our data, so that we do have, like, grantees have logins for this database, but we also have a publicly available login, so anyone can access this information. And it's often just the first kind of gateway where people that might not be familiar with OWEB can go in and start to understand what we invest in, what we award, and find example projects that they can learn from. And I mean, Stephanie and I didn't say this beginning, but please, because the topics we're talking about almost in each slide are kind of different today, they're all interconnected, they all feed into each other, but ask questions at any time. Yeah, Mark.
I was wondering if I could ask a question or wait till the end. So as part of reporting and communications, and does DAS do a audit of our grants, or does it another state agency? Do we get audited so that we can just present this information in a reporting form? And if we do, which I think we do, when was the last time we had an audit, and what did it show?
Steph, I mean, so we have both fiscal audits and programmatic audits. And I'm not sure if either one of us off the top of our head can come up with the programmatic audit date, but we've had one.
The last one, so the last one that I recall that was more of an audit review of lottery funded agencies connected with watershed restoration was done in 2019 and 2020 by the Secretary of State's office. So that's the last one I recall. We're working right now with the Secretary of State's office on a fiscal audit, just related to fund sources. So that was a pretty focused audit that is going on. But I think, Mark, it sounds like you're asking more about, is there a look at the collection of projects that we funded over a specific time period? That
Well,
is something that we do report on that we can talk about a little more later. But yeah, does that answer your question?
A little bit. Because our grants are so complicated and we have so many, and we have to really make sure we track them well. I'm sure there's folks out there that might be watching to say, well, how do we make sure that the money's getting spent and where it's getting spent on certain projects? So do we have a grant monitoring independent of OWEB that looks at it? Because I know we monitor it very carefully as staff, but is there does DAS do that, or Secretary of State as part of the fiscal audit process? I'm just not sure. I know the answer to that.
Sure. So the Secretary of State does do performance audits of agencies on a regular basis. So that, I think that is the best way to describe what you're asking about, Mark. They do that on a regular basis. And yeah, the last one was in 2019, 2020 timeframe that looked more, I would say, is more of a performance audit where they looked at is the agency managing funding appropriately to accomplish its mission.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thanks, Deb. So this slide shows another online tool, and it was really funny. We had a conversation. Are we going to live demo an online tool? And I said, nope, I've never successfully live demoed something on a website in a presentation. So this is just a screenshot. But this is the Oregon Investment Tracking Tool. And this tool makes the OWEB online grant management data that I just showed you in the previous two slides available online and searchable with, obviously you can see with mapping integrated. So OWEB funds OSU and the Institute of Natural Resources through their Oregon Explorer portal to build and maintain two different online tools, which pull OWEB's data into an interactive viewer that users can search and display. And actually, just as like a side note, when I was first, looking at OWEB and looking at information 20 years ago, the OWRI and these kinds of tools, like when I was in grad school, was my first like entryway into OWEB and like what's the kind of information that OWEB keeps and tracks. So this tool allows you to explore how OWEB grant funding is distributed across the state. You can filter data such on watershed, the grant type, the year, the funding source, the county, and by keywords. You can answer the questions here that Audrey was starting to show on the first page, like how much have we invested in a region on a specific project type. And a lot of local partners use this tool to help prepare materials for site visits, for presentations to county governments, and for just communicating with their board and local partners. So at OWEB, both Bobby Riggers and Paula Willis work together to help populate this data. This is one of the examples of not real-time data. So our grantees report to the Oregon Watershed Restoration Inventory. We do a QA/QC process, again, to make sure the data is accurate, and then it gets exported annually to OSU and INR in the Oregon Explorer. We also use this tool heavily to create the Oregon Biennial Report. So this tool provides us information about the Oregon Plan basins, and we're able to then pull information from the Oregon Investment Tracking Tool to help create and report on the Oregon Biennial Report, which Audrey will talk about more. All right. Now I'm passing it off to Audrey.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. So we are going to talk for a moment. Courtney talked about the grant management system and then a tool that helps viewers interact with that data. Now we're going to talk about another OWEB-owned data set, which is the Oregon Watershed Restoration Inventory, or ORI. That is maintained by OWEB and is the largest single repository of restoration project data in the Western US. It has been housing restoration data sets and making them available to the public, so grad students like Courtney, since around 2006. So that's giving us almost 2 decades worth of access to restoration project data. And this slide shows the page where someone can enter their data into the ORI system. We'd like to take a minute to go over who enters the data, because that's important, the source. So several different types of users will enter their information into ORI. OWEB grantees report restoration projects to ORI when the projects are completed, when their OWEB grant is closing out. And this is typically a few years later than the time that that project was initially funded. And that's important to keep in mind when we look at some of the reports that we're going to summarize for you later on. And this committee heard a presentation that touched on telling the restoration story at your last committee meeting. And several of those telling the restoration story grantees use the data from ORI as part of producing their data-driven outreach products. And then in addition to what OWEB grantees do, external partners come to ORI and use the inventory to voluntarily report restoration actions. One example is many of Oregon's private forest landowners using the system. ORI is specifically to collect restoration data. So OWEB does not collect and store any data on water quality, on fish populations, or fish habitat. Rather, the agencies that manage those resources steward those data sets. For example, DEQ is responsible for water quality data. Fish and Wildlife is responsible for fish habitat data. When it's appropriate, OWEB's grant agreements, especially the monitoring agreements, will require our grantees to submit to those agencies if they've collected water quality or habitat data. And OWEB works closely with those agencies as partners to report on conservation outcomes and trends through the biennial report and some of those other communication tools that we'll touch upon. Next slide, please. We will look at a kind of a sibling interactive data tool that helps folks understand, view, download, and use the data from ORI. So as Courtney described with that investment tracking tool, OWEB partners with the Oregon State University Institute for Natural Resources Oregon Explorer team to make the restoration inventory data available through this Oregon Watershed Restoration Tool. So this informational tool provides access to those ORI data sets as they are updated and quality controlled each year. We have also noted that often the individuals who are grantees who are responsible for entering their project restoration data into ORI, we've noted that those are also often the data users who will come to the Oregon Explorer tool, the watershed restoration tool that you see here, and want to access the restoration output that has happened in a particular area over time to put together their reports and document outcomes about local restoration impacts. And next, we will take a moment to walk through a brief example showing just one of the ways that this data tool can be used. So go ahead and go forward, please. Thank you. The Watershed Restoration Tool offers the ability to generate some tailored individual reports on specific geographic areas. So here we're showing the John Day Basin, and you can see that kind of highlighted in that bright blue on the screen as we zoomed in a little bit here. And you'll see from the menu on the left-hand side, we selected Oregon Plan Basin, the John Day Basin. You can also see in that menu on the left-hand side, there are some other options for producing a report. Like you can produce a report by county, statewide, sub-basin, or you can even draw your own area on the map. Let's go ahead and go forward one, please. And we are showing here that we then selected funding for the John Day Basin, covering the years 2017 through 2023. So again, that will include all that published quality control data. And the output tells us that over $27 million has been invested in restoration in the John Day Basin. And it also kind of shows the in-kind contributions, meaning things like volunteer hours for that time frame. And then next, please, we will take a look at another portion of the area report that we just generated for the John Day Basin. And on this screen, we can zoom in to one portion of the report and see the amounts invested in the different types of restoration projects. So in-stream, riparian, fish passage projects, etc. And we could have selected a different date range. We could have done a year by year report or focused on only one specific project type. For example, really focus on fish screening projects. Users also through the tool have the option to download data, and they have the option to interact with information on that map view that you saw. So for today's presentation, we wanted to choose a couple common questions that can be answered through the watershed restoration tool. And next, I'm going to hand it back to Courtney to talk about another one of the agency's data sources.
Thanks, Audrey. Before we move on, any other questions on just that access of data? And I'd say that's probably one of our most used areas where, again, people can go in and download the data, manipulate it, understand it. When Audrey was presenting last time on the Telling Restoration Story grants, that's one of the areas that our grantees really use and are able to access that data to help with the Telling the Restoration Story grants. So, as Stephanie mentioned at the beginning, we have to report all of our federally funded projects and all of those projects that we use to meet our 33% match requirement to Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery Fund's online database. We do this reporting twice a year, and we have two staff on board at OWEB, Ish and Max, that are responsible for all that reporting. We also report all of the ODF and W projects that are implemented with the Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery Fund to this database also. One of the things that OWEB is really, really proud about is we are what NOAA calls an A+ reporter. We do an amazing job reporting to this database. The data from this database is used to create a report for Congress, which is typically annually created and distributed to Congress, and we receive copies of it, and we usually talk about it at an OWEB board meeting. It has not been published this calendar year, the report to Congress, but maybe in the future it will be created again. So this is just an updated snapshot of the data that's currently in the database. And you can sort, again, this is publicly available, so Ish and Max have behind the scenes logins, but also it's open to anyone in the public can go in. You can download sections of data. You can search by the various PCSRF grantees, which include states, tribes, and tribal consortiums. You can sort by grantee type, so you can actually go in and look for projects that we've given to ODF and W over time in this database. We can look at, habitat and stream miles. We can look by basins and project type via restoration or monitoring or research, all sorts of different ways that we can look at this data, and we can use it to help understand what our Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery investments are, as well as our match. Mark?
Sorry for asking so many questions.
No, please ask why you're here.
So just looking at this chart is pretty telling. What is the rationale or reason for the last 3 years of the precipitous decline in PCSRF funds?
So what you're seeing there is we don't report a project to this database until it is essentially open. So we have awarded the funds, the grantee has signed a grant agreement, they've submitted back to us our the appropriate metrics. We've had a chance to review those metrics. So what you're seeing is, like, for 2023 and 2024, the reason there's not the number isn't as high is because those funds aren't in grant agreements yet, and they're not quote unquote open in the PCSRF database. And you can see that we've, gotten a lot more of those 2024 funds into a grant agreement. And so and then like the 2022, which is that really high, it's a huge award year, and most of that funding is in grant agreements and has been reported to NOAA. So this database is updated twice a year, and then there is a lag time for new awards that we get from NOAA to get reported to the database. But great question.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. So this is just a great tool. Yeah, Jesse?
So just to double check, the information that's in this database is also reported into the OWRI database or the other ones that you've already shared.
Yes, great question. So all of this would be in, for restoration projects, it would be in the Oregon Watershed Restoration Inventory. This also includes information on any acquisition projects we've put PCSRF in, any technical assistance grants, and it would also include any other project types that we use as match. So we use Watershed Council and District Operating Capacity grants as match. We use, in the past, we've used CREP Technical Assistance as match. Those things wouldn't be represented in the Oregon Watershed Restoration Inventory because it's just restoration projects. Water acquisitions are in here. We have been using those as match because we have other funds right now for water acquisitions. When we submit reports to NOAA, they review all that and give us feedback. And again, this is where we consistently get great feedback that we're articulating the projects the way NOAA wants us to, our data is accurate. We also have to work with tribes. So sometimes tribes receive PCSRF funds. They receive an OWEB lottery funded grant, and we're both reporting to the database. So we have to coordinate with our tribal partners also to make sure we're not double reporting a project. But again, at the end of the day, we do a great job, and NOAA greatly appreciates our accurate and timely reporting. Audrey, back to you.
Thank you, Courtney. We can go on to our next slide on key performance measures, performance and outcome measures. So what we're going to do for the next few minutes is talk briefly about 4 regular reports that OWEB produces that use the agency data and information. So like all other state agencies, OWEB provides an annual performance progress report to the legislature each year, and often uses that information as part of the agency's budget presentation during the years when the budget is being developed. So as part of the process for the annual performance progress report, OWEB reports on 12 key performance measures that help us tell how well we're doing in delivering services. And as you can see, some of these measures also look at the impact of our work. So 11 of the key performance measures are unique to OWEB. So numbers 1 through 11 on the screen. And these 11 use data from our fiscal, administrative, and restoration ORI data sets to inform some metrics about how our investments are functioning to lead to desired outcomes. And the final key performance measure looks at our customer service, and all state agencies report on this exact same metric each year. So this slide shows you the key performance measures and the progress for the current report, which covers the fiscal year 2025. It was just completed and submitted this month. And then the legislatively established targets are shown on the right-hand side. So you can kind of see where are we, and in comparison to that target, where are we not meeting the target, and then the report discusses why, and then are we exceeding the target through this graphic. And I guess I'm going to also pause and just comment that Stephanie provides this information as part of the agency's report each year. So I guess any questions over this for Stephanie or me or Courtney before we go on to the next example?
Well, just a comment. Congratulations on the I can't see it right now, but the customer service. My deal cut off there, so that says a lot about folks. Customer service is huge for me, and that's really great to see that number so high. Really, that's really great. It should be complimented for that.
And that's some of you on that, so thanks for that. And I expect that.
Thanks. And any other questions? Brian? Brian, you might be on mute.
Sorry about that. I thought I hit that button. The targets. So can you describe how those are generated a bit?
I'm happy to do that. Or Stephanie, would you like to take that one since they are approved by the legislature?
Go ahead, Audrey, and then I can add anything.
Yeah, so the targets must be approved by the legislature, but they are developed. So since, especially for those first 11, they're unique to OWEB, there is a lot of interaction with the agency to determine like what's reasonable. So I'm particularly building on that ORI example. So the measures on streamside habitat numbers 8, and then upland habitat number 9, and miles of native fish habitat opened number 11. Those all use information from ORI to calculate that 308 miles, 47,000 acres. And it's looking at the last 10 years of their ORI data sets to kind of look at what's a reasonable target. There's a lot of variability in those measures, and the report kind of talks about some specific reasons why, but those targets are developed using ORI data. So there is interaction with the agency kind of about what's reasonable there. For some of the other metrics, like the first one, kind of the agency operations funding, like the percent of funding and operations compared with the amount that is granted out, that is determined by the legislature. So there's an interaction there, and targets are determined several years in advance. Steph?
Yeah, that's great, Audrey. I would just say there can be a conversation between us and our analyst in the legislature, and that's really helpful. Like Audrey said, we talk about what are the past year's performance, what are some of the things that influence the results that are within our control versus beyond our control. And I think one piece of advice I really appreciated from our analyst is, yes, look at the targets, but also just look at the overall trend in your performance, and don't let comparing yourselves to the target like lead you to forget just looking at that trend in overall performance.
Okay, no, that's helpful because I was, yeah, the the being able to characterize what investments have been made and where that's like super important, and those systems are quite impressive. But as we were going through that, I was wondering, well, how do those stack up against a benchmark for where we want to go? So that's helpful. Appreciate it.
Nicole, can you help me see, or are there any other questions on the KPNs, or should we head on to the next example?
It looks like we don't have any more questions if you want to keep going.
All right, Steph, you can go ahead, please. So this is the second example of regular reports using OWEB data and information out of the 4 examples we wanted to show you today. So every 2 years, OWEB leads an effort to report to the governor and legislature on progress under the Oregon Plan for Salmon and Watersheds. And this report is required by the statute that established the Oregon Plan and OWEB as an agency. The report includes information on funding during the most recent biennium, funding authorized by the board, as well as funding reported as match through the restoration inventories. You can see in the graphic here, divided out by different categories of restoration partners. The biennial report also provides information on relevant activities from other state natural resource agency partners. It provides a summary of restoration data from the restoration inventory, and wherever possible, whenever possible, comparable data from our federal partners, the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, and overarching recommendations on monitoring and progress under the Oregon Plan. So this slide is showing information from the most recent report that covered actually the 2021-23 biennium. The next report that's going to be, the next report will cover the time period 2023 through 2025, so through June of 2025. That report is being compiled now, and it will be provided to the OWEB board for your January meeting. And that time it will also be made available to the governor and state legislators as required in that statute. Any questions over the Oregon Plan biennial report? And hearing none, we can go on to the third example. So the third example of regularly produced data-intensive reports. OWEB works with our focused investment partnerships to produce progress tracking reports throughout the life of their initiative. So that 6-year, 3 biennia initiative and beyond, to track progress in connection with their scientifically robust progress monitoring framework and theory of change. So these progress tracking reports are intended to be used as a suite of publications that describe progress each biennium and over time, and describe adaptive management throughout the life of a FIP. So all of the current and past reports are published on OWEB's website. You can see the link on the screen. You can also navigate to all of the reports through OWEB's website by selecting the Grant Programs tab, and then Focused Investment Partnerships, and then the tab View, or the button View Funded Initiatives and Progress Reports, to see the full list and links to them. In addition to the OWEB board, progress tracking reports are useful to help legislators and policymakers understand impacts from our investments. Each partnership may also identify their own audience for their reports and share with them through their own communication avenues. And next slide, we wanted to take a moment and just show kind of the inside of one of these reports so that you can see how the progress tracking reports really do connect to that theory of change. So this slide is showing one example page of a progress tracking report and looking at what is included and thinking about the logic there. So this is showing the overall FIP initiative goal at the top in that sort of blue box. And then that's followed by the key strategies. These are strategies identified by the partnership that they believe will help really achieve that goal, contribute to that goal. Then accomplishments specific to a particular funding, or excuse me, a particular reporting cycle, are things that we're showing as these implementation bubbles. And so just to talk through a couple examples here, there are bubbles here about communication report was produced, a video was produced. Some of these bubbles include outreach and engagement, or things that happened during the reporting cycle that were particularly notable for some reason. During COVID, a lot of the partners talked about, we pivoted to online products. We used our website to get our message out. So those bubbles are a place for the partnership to describe some emerging things that are really key to implementation of their initiative that aren't necessarily the same things that are tracked consistently over time. Those things that are tracked consistently over time are shown at the bottom as bars. And we ask and work with each partnership to really set on the right-hand side again an objective or target, if you will, what is reasonable to achieve over the FIP initiative towards those implementation strategies that you're working on, towards those kind of important outcomes that link directly to that theory of change. So at the bottom of the screen, we're showing the near term and longer term outcomes the partnership identified in their theory of change, and kind of how those are quantified and tracked over time and consistently from report to report. So each one of these progress tracking reports is cumulative, that shows impact of funding and progress achieved since that FIP was started. These reports are produced on regular intervals to help the board and partners understand progress towards ecological objectives. And any questions over anything so far? We're ready to head to the last example. Seeing none, our fourth and final example of reports we wanted to demonstrate is how OWEB's recently refreshed strategic plan helps identify priorities and keep us accountable to them through quarterly reports provided at board meetings. So we thought we would show this example through one of the priorities, strategies, and actions that's kind of called out on this slide. So it highlights language from the strategic plan refresh around telling the restoration story. So one of our key priorities, top priority number 1, through our grant making, build awareness of the relationship between people and watershed protection. And this strategy includes efforts to tell the story clearly and compellingly. And then underneath that priority, strategy 1.1 is kind of showing how a specific objective can be linked to telling the story. One core activity that guides the monitoring staff and partners work. If we implement these core activities, we do expect to achieve the outcomes that are kind of shown over on the right-hand side of the slide. So that's just highlighting one example of how we're using these strategic plan reports to keep us accountable to the priorities and objectives set forth in that strategic plan. Staff are providing quarterly strategic plan reports to the board through the director's update at board meetings, as well as using the strategic plan reporting to meet requirements from the Oregon Governor's Office. So that's our last example of data and reporting, and I will hand it back over to Stephanie. Thanks.
I think before I hand it off to Stephanie, I'll just wrap up to say, essentially, we use all these pieces, all these tools, both to create the reporting products, the communication outcomes Stephanie's going to talk about, but it also helps us think about where do we have data gaps? Where do we have information gaps? And I think in the future, we'll be, bringing conversations to this committee about, are there questions that we could be answering with our data? Are you hearing about questions that we should be answering with our data? And those can be future investments of effectiveness monitoring, of telling the restoration story grants. And so we want to use all of this that we just walked through to help us identify future questions, help us identify future monitoring investments that will help continue to inform our restoration investments over time. And on to you, Stephanie.
All right. Before I start or I kick us off on the communications overview, I wanted to add a little more information in response to Mark's earlier question about audits. So our last audit was published in December 2020 by the Oregon Secretary of State's office. And the title of the report they produced is by appropriately administering Measure 76 funds, Oregon is advancing constitutional goals for state parks and natural resources. So the audit looked at how all of the agencies that receive part of the Measure 76 dollars for parks and watershed health are administering those dollars together. So that's OWEB and several other agencies. And the report didn't include any recommendations, which is often there are findings and recommendations, and this report just said the agencies are doing a good job and didn't have recommendations for improvement. So just wanted to mention that. All right. So you just heard about a combination of data about projects and some really powerful tools to query the data and report on the data in different ways. We've also got some wonderful stories about projects. And so again, there's a lot of interconnection between reporting and communications. Linda and I are going to talk about the guiding principles and the goals and strategies that we use to communicate information and tell stories. All right, so what are we trying to accomplish with OWEB's communications? What you see here are a couple of ways that we support OWEB's strategic plan through communications activities. Those are increasing awareness about OWEB programs and also about how partners are using these programs to accomplish restoration on the ground. And to support priority 2 of the OWEB strategic plan, our communications are hopefully supporting engaging the diversity of Oregonians in watershed work. These are the values that we're trying to express through OWEB communications. One thing I really want to emphasize is that our communications involves partnerships with the local grantees. The local grantees are the folks doing the work with support from OWEB, and they're a key piece in our communications philosophy. So we are trying to center the work of grantees in their communities and the local partners that they also collaborate with to accomplish that work. So we do want to convey OWEB's role, but really celebrate and acknowledge that the local partners are the ones leading this work. In addition to the internal communications focus that you see featured in the top group of bullets on this slide, a key focus of OWEB's communications work involves supporting the board and staff and fostering effective communications both internally and externally. So that support provides professional presentations and reports to the board and staff. And not only do they look beautiful, which I know you've all noticed and we all comment on internally, but more importantly, they translate complicated concepts and processes into graphics that help us all understand and absorb information. Also, as noted on the earlier slide, we uplift the work of our partners. That includes grantees on the ground, and our communications also highlight important messages from state and federal agencies. So if you follow us on social media, for example, you'll see us relaying important messaging from state and federal partners as well as local partners. Okay, let's see. Linda, is this one yours or is this one mine? I think this.
Yep, I'll take over
All
from here.
right, over to Linda.
For the record, this is Linda Replinger, Publication Specialist with OWEB. And I'm going to talk about some of the key messages for our communication strategy. We start out with watersheds are for all. This means that we all live in, are connected through, and are reliant on our watersheds. And it's important to connect watersheds in our work back to the folks who depend on them in an all-inclusive way. This means connecting everyone from a community member who is fertilizing or watering their lawn to a sport fisherman who's teaching their kids about fishing in local streams, a farmer who's interested in irrigation efficiency upgrades, a research student who's looking into the effectiveness of post-fire recovery efforts, or a local partner who wants to both share their restoration efforts and experiences, as well as learn more about OWEB programs that can support them in their work, and many more. Another key message is to clearly communicate OWEB's mission and role in watershed restoration. We emphasize the work being done by local partners and how this restoration work is mutually beneficial for the communities that rely on safe, clean, dependable water. And then tying this role in with the role of data, an interesting aspect of this includes that the work being done results in data that is then also used to inform the work. So good examples of these are ones that we just saw in work with adaptive management reports in the FIPS progress tracking reports and also the intensively monitored watersheds. Another key message is to inform the public about important events, grant opportunities, and application due dates, webinars and meetings. This also includes volunteer opportunities and events for folks who want to have a chance to be involved in their local watersheds. We also do an annual call for data on voluntary restoration work across the state, as you saw earlier with the OWRI. And then we share these results and this data in various reports. And lastly, the key message is that we celebrate, and this is not leastly, we celebrate the success stories of our grantees and partners. We want to make sure to let our grantees take the lead, and then we help to amplify that so that we can keep the focus on the work and on the grantees and folks that are doing the work without stealing their thunder. The information is both drawn from metric data and narrative data. So folks may submit quantitative data into ORI that goes into a report about how many stream miles have been restored. And also we draw from the qualitative data from the progress completion reports in OGMAS. Next slide, please. So our main target audiences include the general public, non-traditional prospective partners, grantees and partners, the OWEB board, and state and federal legislators. Next slide, please. And then this slide shows, it demonstrates that we have a handful of ways in which we communicate. And so this chart shows the different channels in which we use to reach each target audience. And I want to note that you'll see that each target audience is reached through several different channels, so that if we don't reach them in one way, we try to reach them in multiple other ways. So starting with our channels, I'll talk about them a little bit. We have our website, which is used by all of our target audiences. So it has a very wide range of needs. We need to use it to coordinate with folks that are managing their grants on a daily basis, that are going to apply for new grants, as well as folks that are brand new to OWEB and want to know more about us. Next, we have our social media. So social media is similar in that we reach all of our target audiences through that. We have a Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube account, and we post an average of 4 to 5 posts a week. Next, we have news, which describes articles from OWEB, from our grantees and partners, and anything that involves OWEB's work or ways that we cross-pollinate with similar work. And these news articles are shared on our website as well as our social media. Next, we have bulletins, which include Gov delivery and email listservs that are used mainly to communicate with our grantees and partners and the board. Presentations we give regularly to our grantees, partners, the board, and to our state and federal legislators. We also give presentations when we meet with non-traditional and possible future partners. And then we have online videos that are available on our YouTube channel and are listed on our website. And these range from a high-level introductory information about OWEB to more specific how-to information that is there for our regular grantees and partners using our services. We also use surveys with the general public and our grantees and partners, in addition to listening sessions, which is something we typically do when we have a new program. And we want to get input from the community and from our partners that will then inform the new program and the way that we work. And then we also use reports. We talked about some of them earlier. We have several annual reports that demonstrate the work being done. Most of these are for the benefit of our grantees and partners, the board and state and federal legislators, but they may also be of interest to the general public. Some of these include the county fact sheets that describe how money is invested in different counties across the state and what the outcomes of that is. We do the PCSRF report to Congress that Courtney talked about earlier. And in many years, that has either a telling a restoration story online or a PDF or various different ways, web stories they've done. We also do an environmental justice report annually. And then coming up soon, we'll be doing the Oregon Plan for Salmon and Watershed report. And lastly, but not inclusive, not the only report, but we also do the budget reports. And next we have the brochures and handouts. These we typically would use when we go on a trip to DC to meet with legislators, or when we are in our own legislative session here in Oregon. We also use them at conferences for our grantees and partners. But we have in recent years pivoted more toward having non-printed material and material online that supports having sustainability. And then the last channel I'm going to talk about here are our webinars. And our webinars are a bit more targeted toward our grantees, partners, and prospective future grantees and partners. And they're usually geared toward a specific grant program and when that grant program is opening, and as a way to connect with folks and answer questions and prepare them to be successful. And that is it on the target audiences and channels. Next slide, please.
Great. I see, Mark, you have your hand up.
Yes, could you go back to the last slide, Linda?
Oops, sorry. Give me a minute. There we go.
So on the listening sessions, do we, you may have covered this, so I apologize, but like on grantees and partners, let's say the watershed councils have an annual meeting every year, I think. Do we go there and have a listening session saying, how are we doing? What do we need to improve on? Some of the, some of our grantees, do we have a meeting once a year or something that says, okay, how are we doing? Where's their strengths? Where's our weaknesses? And same with general public.
I can answer part of that, Stefan. You can jump in. So so often our regional program representatives are invited to those annual meetings, or maybe they'll go just depending on their schedule. It's not necessarily formal where our regional program representatives are going annually to each council or district to their annual meeting. There's a lot of them, and they often, happen at the same times. But they're engaging with them through various avenues, but it's not necessarily a formal, hey, can we get feedback on how we're doing? I think the customer service survey that we're required to do as a state agency is one of those anonymous tools that all of our grantees get where they can give us feedback, but it's not necessarily a formal listening session. Stephanie, what else do you want to add?
Also, a couple of organizations that we partner with closely, including Network of Oregon Watershed Councils, Oregon Association of Conservation Districts, and Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts, have either annual or biennial meetings. And then the Conservation Partnership collaborates to put on a conference every 2 years called Connect. It provides for dialogue, but it also provides a lot of great training opportunities for folks from those organizations. So we often attend, and it's a mixture of providing updates from OWEB to gathering feedback to giving a presentation about something we've heard grantees would like to learn more about, to giving a technical presentation about some aspect of our grant programs. So I wouldn't say, Mark, that we do a listening session at each of those every year, but we have a strong presence. And I think just depending on the year and the situation, there's either a two-way dialogue or information exchange with those partners.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure our regional reps are having coffee with folks and listening and saying how we doing and keeping the information spread around too. So thank you.
Great question. So we're welcoming additional questions from committee members, and we also have some questions for you. So I'll go to that slide next, but before I do, any other questions from committee members?
Yeah, I have a question. So I guess I want to step back and kind of summarize what I think I heard as far as how we, define what we've done and how that compares to some sort of benchmark. So the board funds a lot of work across the state and a lot of different activities, and we went through that, and we can track what we've done and how that compares to an accountability target that's been established based on past performance and expectations moving forward. So that's done broadly across all the activities that are funded at an activity level. But then at a more programmatic level, we have the FIPS, where those partnerships develop the whole theory of change and look over a longer period of time and define some benchmarks that aren't just individual projects, but a group, a suite of projects that result in a bigger kind of outcome. And so those two things are kind of broadly correct, right? We're looking across all activities everywhere, and then we have these kind of bigger programmatic looks that define that, and we were able to track that as well. In that, though, there was mention of watershed action plans being developed through at least some of the FIPS. So can you elaborate a little bit more on how that, where and how frequently those are done, at what scale, and do they define a broader portfolio of work that's needed to be done across some sort of time frame, like over the next 10 years in this sub watershed, of tens of thousands of acres, we want to do this work, and so that we can look at things programmatically at that scale where we're saying we're 80% done with the work that's been defined for this watershed in this period of time, kind of thing. So that there's is there another way to kind of cast those individual activities in a programmatic context beyond what we do in the FIPS? So anyway, does that make sense? I apologize, that wasn't the most
Yes,
concise
Audrey.
question.
No,
Yeah.
great question, Audrey. Why don't you?
I can start and then and you can add on. So thanks, Brian. Audrey Hatch for the record on Conservation Outcomes Coordinator. I would like to add to your summary. You're kind of talking about, we look at the outcomes from our investments through the Focused Investment Partnership. We have made that longer term investment, and we can look and we have those reports and mechanisms in place to look longer term. I do want to add to your summary, and maybe Courtney could touch more on this, through the quantifying conservation outputs and outcomes portion of the board's biennial spending plan. There is work such as Linda mentioned, funding intensively monitored watersheds that has focused on more programmatic effectiveness type monitoring initiatives. So I do want to make that point. That's a component of the board's budget. And then to your question about, I think you're keying in on maybe strategic action plans that each FIP initiative produces. It's actually a required component of their application process. And there was recently, there is a guidance document made available for partners considering working to produce one of these strategic action plans. That guidance document was funded through OWEB funding with and it was done by the Bonneville Environmental Foundation, and others kind of helped to produce that strategic action plan guidance. It was produced with the inspiration of the FIP program, but it is available. It's guidance, and there's a recent webinar that was held to kind of explain the guidance a little bit more. It's made available to all, regardless of whether partners are considering applying for a FIP. So it's intended as a reference for folks to use. And regarding time frame and geography, those could be broader than the FIP initiative has applicants really focus on a FIP geography, and that they receive that 6 years of funding. We do all realize it takes longer than the 6 years to even expend the funding, and much less begin to see the near-term and long-term outcomes. So it is longer than 6 years, but they receive 6 years of funding. And then that is what we really focus on through the progress tracking reports, is what's the income of the OWEB, or excuse me, what's the impact of the OWEB funding. But it does tie to that strategic action plan. It has a broader time frame. The time frame isn't prescribed. It can be determined by the initiative as appropriate to the type of habitat they work in. So
Right.
long-term, work in aquatic habitat might have a different type of strategic action plan than relatively newer restoration work in oak woodlands, for example. So hopefully that helps a little. I'll pass it to Courtney.
Yeah, I think Audrey did a fabulous job describing that. So most of the partnerships that are currently funded by OWEB, their strategic action plans are, live kind of on their partnership site. They are bigger. They are much more broad and extensive than what they apply for through the Focused Investment Partnership. And that application process includes essentially a draft work plan of what from their strategic action plan, what are they going to implement with OWEB's funding over the time frame that they propose. And then some FIPs that then come back for a second FIP are essentially coming in and saying, we got this much done with our strategic action plan. We've updated it, and now we know we need to do these things next within our watershed to meet our ecological outcomes that we've proposed.
Right. So those action plans are really largely tied just to the watershed scale plans are largely tied just to the FIPS, but there is guidance that's available, and people can use both the planning for the FIP kind of strategic action plans at that scale, but also, the watershed scale planning is a finer scale within the FIP process to execute on that. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think what would probably be super beneficial, and Steph and I are taking notes about future conversations, is to kind of maybe walk this committee through, what is that strategic action plan? Then what is it that they're putting on the ground through that work? And then what are we reporting out on the outcomes at the end of the FIPS? I think in the past, it was definitely one of the emphasis of this committee is helping set up some of that tracking around our FIPS. We've learned a lot over time about what we can accomplish under the life cycle of a FIP. And I think it's probably a great opportunity to start thinking about with this committee, this is how we started with tracking outcomes of FIPS, and what is some input this committee might have about how we should be tracking outcomes of the FIPS in the future.
Yeah. No, I think that would be super helpful.
And Audrey Hatch again, for the record, before we go to future questions, I do want to add on that the work done around kind of the FIP and the strategic action plan guidance, that was building on a longer or older or earlier work around sub-basin watershed plans and watershed action plans. A lot of the work that was done around coastal coho, and so there is also that history of planning efforts available to watershed partners as well.
Thanks, Audrey. Claire?
Hi, sorry for a pivot, but I just have a clarifying question. When y'all were talking about the ORI and the annual call for data, do you incorporate or accept data from not OWEB associated projects?
Yes, exactly. We do. So the Oregon Watershed Restoration Inventory is the largest voluntary reporting collection of restoration projects on the West Coast. So all of our grantees are required to report their restoration projects to the Oregon Watershed Restoration Inventory. And then Bobby Riggers does an annual call for voluntary reporting and works with, has contacts across the state and federal agencies that she reaches out to. We get private federal reporting, tribes, and really encourage that voluntary reporting of non-OWEB funded restoration projects.
Is there any like vetting of that data by y'all, or you just take it as it comes?
Bobby does extensive QA/QC of that data before it's
Okay.
published.
Cool, very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, we'll move us to some questions that we thought of for the committee members. So please, if there's any here that resonate with you that you'd like to speak to, or additional questions that this is generating for you, we just thought we could have some dialogue. Mark.
So I've been on OWeb for 6 years now, and it just blows me away how much I don't know. So, and this was a really good presentation today about the tracking system, reporting, and communications. I knew some of it, but it was very informative for me. So when the question about additional audience not yet mentioned, it's, I think there's other, I don't know how it's going to work, but I think it would be very informative for other OWeb board members to see this presentation. And so maybe Nicole could send it out and just say, hey, if you're interested, there was some comments made about how informative this was and that you might be interested in hearing that presentation. And so they could pull it up, and if a board member's interested, watch this tape presentation, because it was very informative for me when I thought I knew some things and I didn't know, and it was just very helpful. So on additional audience, I would recommend that. So.
You're ahead of me, Mark. That was on my list of to-dos right after this. I agree. This was an excellent presentation, and it's something that I think the whole board should be watching.
Oh, thank you very much, Mark. We really appreciate that. And just kudos to the team that put the presentation together. I think one thing we do struggle with sometimes is how to share all of the reports that we generate with the board without overwhelming you. So this seems like it felt like it was about at the right elevation. I think another thing we've talked about is Sarah incorporating reports into her director's reports at board meetings as those reports get published. So that we're not flooding your email inboxes with the reports necessarily, but we are making you aware of them in a way that's hopefully not overwhelming. But yeah, if folks have thoughts about that, we do sometimes we'll include reports in the board materials too, just as an example, the Oregon Plan Biennial Report, the Environmental Justice Report, the Annual Tribal Report, and so forth. So yeah, if you have feedback on other ways we can be packaging that and flagging it for you, always open to your perspectives on that.
Claire?
Sorry, Jesse.
Yeah. A couple things, I guess. That was really interesting because I feel like we have a similar issue in that we have a lot of data, we make a lot of reports, but oftentimes I'm not sure the reports get into the right hands of the audience, or maybe in our mind, the data we're providing that audience is the right data, but from them, it's not what they actually want, or it's not in a way they can digest it. So that's a perennial, I guess, thing in my mind. But I was curious about how this ties into like outreach, and maybe that's just a different kind of approach or just different language that we use. I saw kind of a target audience of non-traditional prospective partners, and just wondering if that is kind of y'all's language, or is like a state agency for some of that outreach, or if outreach is kind of a separate piece for y'all from the reporting and communication.
I can try to answer that one, and fellow presenters, please feel free to add in. I think we have worked on doing some outreach to non-traditional partners over the last few years, and a lot of it is just either directly contacting groups that we think may be potentially interested in OM programs and might be interested in connecting with us. We've also tried to set up just some regular opportunities to touch base with some of the ag organizations whose members might be interested in getting an OWEB grant. So those are a few things we've done. I think one challenge we run into sometimes is when we're talking to somebody who could be a potential host for an OWEB funded project, they don't necessarily need to be working with us. They need to be working with a grantee in their local community. So I think that's a piece of the message that we're always trying to get across is, hey, there are these programs available from OWEB, there are grants available. Here are some options for groups you could partner with in your local community if you're interested in hosting a project.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I would add is connecting what Stephanie just said is, Linda has done a fabulous job using our social media mechanisms as an outreach tool to say, this is the great work we do. In order for you, specific landowner or your community to do that, here are the partners out in your community. Here's how you connect with them. Here's the amazing work we're doing. And I would say, that kind of the connecting of the reports and the data and the communication to the outreach and connecting it to the local audiences has really flourished under using social media to highlight the work of the local partners and kind of highlight those connections. Awesome, thank you.
So I have a question on a comment on the bottom one, and maybe this is for Linda. I haven't been to the website in quite a while. So do we have a segment of our website that says reports, and then they can click on it and see all the various reports that we have so that we don't overwhelm people, but if they want to see a report or they want to look for a report, it's easy to find on our webpage?
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for the question. We have a couple of different ways that folks can find that information. We have a publications page that has different reports that have been, most recently published. So if you go on there, you'll find the latest environmental justice report, the latest report for Oregon Plan for Salmon Watersheds, etc. Another way, I would say that's probably the most inclusive, actually. But we also have a page for field guides and more technical information too.
Other questions for us?
I will take us to the next slide, which is topics for the next meeting. And Mark's question actually made me think of even another topic that we could cover either at the next meeting or a future meeting. But I think some of the things we had thought about for the next meeting is delving in more to some of the results of some of the reports that we talked about today. So we could delve into the 2025 key performance measures report results a little bit more, preview some of what we're seeing in the Oregon Plan biennial report. We could show you the county fact sheets that Linda referred to, which are a summary of investments in each county. We could also, at some point, we could take a tour of the website, and that might be something of interest, especially as we're exploring ways to make the website more accessible, and especially a couple of key elements of the website. So Linda and I can connect offline about what would be good timing for that. But your question made me think of that, Mark.
And then the other notes that I have about future topics are kind of helping this committee understand what we have done, how we have set up our tracking of FIPS, what's the history of where we started with the tracking of the FIPS, where we are right now, and then as we, adopt new ecological priorities and launch the next FIP cycle, where maybe should we go related to FIP monitoring and tracking of FIP outcomes. And another idea that was recently shared with me by a staff person, we had an all staff meeting yesterday, was, are there some interesting results and outcomes of some of our more unique grant programs that we've invested in over time, either the drought or fire, and if there's been some outcomes and reports as a result of those programs that this committee might be interested in. Or unique monitoring grants or projects that we have funded that this group might be interested in. So thumbs up from Mark.
I think it's not necessarily a presentation from staff, but maybe just an opportunity for members of the committee to discuss what are like interesting ideas for like a retrospective look at like outcomes over time. So what I'm thinking is like, our first FIP cohorts were 10 plus years ago now, right? And to Brian's question, like, those folks monitor for the 6 years while they get their funding, but like, is it worth trying to like invest in having somebody go back and look at that FIP geography and look at have these outcomes been realized 10 years post funding? So like just trying to think of, are there certain questions or things that would really help demonstrate OWEB's value over time in these larger conservation outcomes? I would love to have the opportunity to have that discussion with other committee members at some point.
Jesse. And we did, sorry, Audrey, quite a few years ago, and the board had a presentation on this, and it's a very different board now, but we did do a retrospective analysis of our operating capacity investments, and we have a report on that on our publications page. And so we've done certain types of certain evaluations of that in the past. And again, would be happy to either share that or think about, are there other additional retrospectives that would be beneficial in the future? Audrey?
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. Audrey Hatch. Just to comment, some additional information along the lines of Board Member Kirshner's question is that the FIP initiatives, there is effort underway to produce a post-FIP report, and there might be some information there that might be of interest to the committee on that topic. Thanks.
Great point.
Thanks, Audrey. Thanks, Staff Member Hatch.
So now that we're winding down, is it appropriate for me to ask a question of Brian under the category of communications?
Are you asking me a question? Is that right, Mark?
So
sure.
I just think the staff might be interested, but I'm definitely interested. Can you give us the latest factual information on the U.S. Forest Service Region 6 potential shakeup of what that information is? Because there's a lot of information in the press right now about U.S. Forest Service reorganizations and those kind of things. Is there anything that you could share that would be informative to us? Because, of course, I'm very interested in the U.S. Forest Service and the role that they play in Oregon, which is huge. So about the reorganization, is there anything you can share that with us?
Yeah, I would say there is a plan that was released. I think you probably saw that information last month from the Secretary's office, and then there is actually a period of time and there's still an opportunity to provide public comment on what that restructuring is going to look like moving forward. And there are efforts underway to for kind of interim operations to kind of continue to operate with the regional offices in place over the next year, and then work towards, as described in that plan, phasing out those offices and having, I think some of those functions will be retained, but there'll be one decision-making level above the national forest at the chief's level, and there'll be a national office rather than 9 regional executives and then the chief. So there's a lot of details that need to be developed, but that's what the proposal is. the plan as written, and as I mentioned, there is an opportunity to comment on that.
Okay, and again, timing, Brian? There's public comment now. When will a decision roughly be made?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, so it's still up in the air then.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
All right, we are officially at time. So thanks everybody. Really appreciate the staff for putting together a great presentation and giving us a very good holistic picture of all of the reporting and communications work that gets done behind the scenes. And it looks like Nicole joined, so I don't know if that means there's something that needs to be said. But otherwise, I think that's it. And we'll see everybody at the board meeting that's coming up in like a month and a half.
Great. Thank you all so much. Everyone have a great day.
Take care, everybody.